Hello everyone and welcome to another True Potential podcast. It's episode 134 and this week we've come together in the studio this week to talk around Her Majesty the Queen and play our own tribute to her. So in a change to the normal format, we obviously know for regular viewers we normally talk around markets and investments. We're leaving that for this week. We can come back to that on the next episode. I'm joined for this different podcast by Jeff Casson, Mark Henderson and Neil Rayner. Hi everyone.
Hi Peter.
Hello. How are you all?
Very well, thanks. Yeah, we're okay.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to see you. This is, as I say, going to be a different type of podcast as usual, but we just felt it was the right thing. We really wanted to, for our viewers and our listeners to the podcast and clients, we just wanted to take a few moments this week and maybe just share with you some of our personal reflections and memories and thoughts about obviously the events of the last week or so. And we'd also welcome you to do the same, by the way. So please, we'd love to hear your reflections and your personal stories, and perhaps many of you may have met the Queen, had interactions, or just even have some personal views in the way that we will as well. So please do feel free to leave those in the comments section just below. Mark, can I come to you first? It's been an emotional week for sure, for the whole country and for other countries as well, where the Queen was head of state. But what are your personal maybe reflections and views of the last week?
I think, Peter, it starts as it will do for everybody last Thursday, and there was clearly something happening, and we got the news at the same time everybody else did, and it actually stopped you in your tracks, even though the Queen was 96 years old. You know, it was a moment where you'll remember where you were when you heard the news, and since then we've watched the coverage, we've seen what's happened particularly over the weekend and over the last few days, and we have to separate our personal feelings about the last week and continue to run the investment portfolio and run True Potential in the way that everybody would expect us to. Now, pushing that to one side, thinking about what's happened, I think for me that there is all of this ceremony that's happening, and it reinforces the reason why Britain is what Britain is. But I think that the most moving parts for me, Peter, were last night when we saw people filing into the Palace of Westminster and see the reaction of everybody who went past the coffin, and it was genuine, and it was unreserved. They weren't thinking there's a camera on me. It wasn't an Instagram moment. It was a genuine moment of appreciation of somebody's life.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw exactly the same thing and had the same feeling that you've got. On the one hand, quite rightly, it's a somber moment and people are naturally very upset about that. But there's an element of recognising that she was, a fantastic, if you like, flying the flag for Britain and the Commonwealth on the world stage, and that she did an awful lot for a life of service, as many people have said. Is that kind of your reflection as well, Jeff, of the last week?
Yeah, I think it brings to reality the long service that the Queen has had, that 70 years of dedicated service to the country, and it's given everybody the opportunity to reflect on that, think back about how things have evolved, how things have changed, but the Queen has been there as a constant that probably we're ever unlikely to see again in terms of that time period. So I think it is it's been said many times by many people, but a period of historical change, and it's something that we're all living through and observing, and I think it's important that each of us take a step back and kind of reflect on that in a way that reflects what the Queen has done, but also what it means personally to each of us as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And Neil, Mark mentioned a few minutes ago that that moment last Thursday, and you're quite right, Mark. We'll all remember where we were, and I very much remember. It flashed up on the phone, the kind of breaking news thing, and it was definitely a stop in your tracks moment. Yeah. And was that sort of your situation as well, Neil? Was that kind of your...
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we were obviously at work, and it was a very, first of all, it was a very quick thing. You've seen sort of the breaking news, as you've just said, and then obviously it escalated quite dramatically over the course of 24 hours. Yeah. But I think more as what Mark said originally was the most thing I thought of straight away was just the shock impact of it, and how it would, you're thinking, God, how is anything going to go on without the Queen? Because she's so much a part of our lives and has been. The only monarch I've known.
Yes.
I can just remember the Queen's first Jubilee.
Right.
Having street parties and them sort of things stick in your head over the years.
Yeah.
But a very sad week.
Yeah.
And also, a very sort of shocked week from an impact point.
And it is interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know whether anybody, I don't think anyone around the table has ever met the Queen. I think I remember vaguely being an 8 or 9 year old, and the Queen came through Newcastle Central Station. They had a lot of the primary schools in, and I was one of the ones lucky enough to. I remember vaguely having a chat with the Prince Prince Philip, but going back a long way. But even though none of us had met the Queen particularly, or and she wasn't part of sort of our daily life. You didn't hear from the Queen every day the way you do from sort of politicians and things like this. She was always there, and I think that was the stop in the tracks moment for me. Is I think one of the former prime ministers said in the week that you just almost like childlike assume that you'll always be there, and of course that was the realization that that's not going to be the case. And I mean, looking back over her reign, I think you mentioned it, Jeff, in terms of the 70-year reign. Is there anything particularly that sort of stands out for the Queen in her life and what she achieved for you, looking back on that time?
I think probably it's more a function of how that bled together and what she did in terms of sort of the characteristics that we think about in terms of the selflessness, the empathy that was constantly shown, and all. I think the humility as well, and I think there's a lot of things there that speak to the values that she held dear to herself, and that we all can take from that. I think that's, for me, that's kind of the key takeaway for me, is those things that are a constant, if you will. It's been a constant, as we've said, through all of our lives as Queen, and those things are hard to reflect upon, but that's really for me what I'm taking away from it, and some of the things that are very clear to myself from that.
And being able to stay absolutely relevant over so much change over her life, but in her reign, but over 70 years, to be able to be as relevant at the end as she was at the start, and the change she must have seen. And I think, again, somebody had said in the week that I read, we don't do anything the same. Technology has changed, the way we interact with each other. The world is a completely different place, and yet there she was. She was, as you say, in all that change. She was that constant.
And it is a tribute to the Queen. We were talking at home last night. There's no other person on the planet who, in death or on their death, would have the same effect globally. We were talking before, Peter, about the tributes that we saw from across the world. Empire State Building, the Eiffel Tower, the way they were lit. But we couldn't think of anybody whose death would have a greater impact than the Queen.
From a global point of view, I mean, you talk about famous people in the world, and you automatically think of footballers and movie stars, celebrities. But if you think of a person that is known by everybody, regardless of what country you're in, it's obviously the Queen.
And I suppose that change has been very significant if you think about it from a social perspective, think about it political, and I suppose that the technology one is there, but I think Mark touched on something that's really a contrast of it, in the sense that we saw everybody with their cameras, their phones out, but then that moment of reflection, whether it was in Edinburgh, in St Giles, or at Westminster Hall, there's no technology. And it's just that pure moment of reflection at a personal level, which is a real contrast to where societally we've moved from a technology perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, the global thing is a really interesting point, that being head of state of this country, but so many others as well, and the relationship that we have with other countries around the world through the Commonwealth. You just, in a funny way, I think on Friday I was chatting to one of our colleagues, and it was, it was emotional, and on the one hand, I was, you're sort of a bit confused, thinking, I'd never met the Queen, didn't know the Queen, but it is you feel a sense of emotion that comes and goes watching the news coverage. And maybe the thing that sort of caught me a little bit, which I was discussing with one of our colleagues, was just, if you like, the fact that the image of Britain that she projected on the world stage, and that's what maybe, although we didn't know her, you sort of realise that Britain, as you say, around the world, has a reputation and is viewed favourably.
Well, it was the figurehead. She's the
exactly,
figurehead. I mean, if you look, it's the iconic Queen's head on a stamp on monetary amounts. The first thing that I thought of when she passed away was, we're coming up at Christmas and the Queen's speech. How will that develop? Obviously, King Charles
Yeah.
will take over that role. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that she was subconsciously
Yeah. Yeah.
involved in that was at the forefront of everyone's
And
minds.
I don't know what in terms of Britain's reputation around the world. I mean, you clearly travel the world in your professional life, and you speak to other people from other countries. I'm not suggesting that she would be necessarily part of those conversations, but Britain's reputation on the world stage. Do you feel that that's largely down to her reign and what she achieved?
I think it's partly due to that, Peter, and I think that there lies the challenge for the king. Because he has to follow in very, very hard. It's a hard footsteps to go forward in. I'm not expressing it very well because I'm trying to think of the best way to put it.
No,
But there is a challenge for the new generation of royals that they will need to step up to the plate on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, thinking about her reign in 7 years, we talked about some of the change she's seen. I mean, in your professional world, there's been an awful lot of change that's happened, and and probably there's probably a lesson or two we could learn from Her Majesty the Queen about just the famous keep calm and carry on type of mentality.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that though has come to just how one perceives change, how one deals with change, and being reflective upon it and thinking about it from a longevity perspective, and the magnitude of. I was just trying to think about just the magnitude of change even in the UK economy over 70 years. It's absolutely massive. And it's very hard to sort of contextualise that and to bring it down to a few key events. There's so many that are key events when you look back over 70 years. You go back to part and parcel of some of the indices that we look at. They reflect the UK industry.
Yeah.
Now you look at them, they reflect international industry, and it just ties into that evolution, adaptability. Some of those words that you would associate with the Queen as well. It's just the things that you have to think about from a business and an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting as well how, in terms of the British, if you like, constitution, that that transfer of power instantly, and of course in the last week, 10 days, we've had a change in terms of the head of state and a change of prime minister as well, and this country is now going in not a new direction, but certainly with new people at the very top of it, Mark, isn't it? We're in a different period now.
Yeah, Peter, and reflecting again, coming back to the Queen, the way that the office was carried out in a non-political way with impartiality, we have to continue to do that, and put aside, as I said earlier, personal feelings. We're looking after billions of pounds worth of client money here, and we have to continue as well. And that's what Jeff and the team have very much been doing. We've got multi-asset portfolios that invest right across the world. Yes, here, right now, the UK is the centre of attention because of the death of the Queen. But commerce continues, life continues, and we've got to embrace that and look forward to the future.
Absolutely, yeah. One other aspect, if you like, that the Queen in particular and the wider royal family are known for is their work for various charities, being patrons of charities, and you can talk about some of those, Mark. But I mean, that's a very strong legacy, isn't it, that they've
absolutely
created there?
Peter. And you were with us in that night in Sunderland. That sounds bad, but it was a night in Sunderland that we were at the Beacon of Light, where the patron of the Beacon of Light is Sophie, Countess of Wessex, and she had what I would say is an everlasting. You won't forget her presence because she was so relaxed and so warm and genuine that type of new royal, if we can term it that way, is really, really what we need in the country. But other things, we've got the Prince's Trust, founded in 1976, that looks as if it's raised about 1.4 billion over the years. Royal patronage of charity is a fantastic thing because it helps. Duke of Edinburgh's award, they're saying that £10 million of, how they measure it, I'm not sure, but £10 million of volunteer time per year is something that is part of a royal charity. And I'll take your link across to Neil on Sunday running the Great North Run.
Yes, of course.
I mean, obviously we have a minute's silence just before we started the run on Sunday, and the thing that I noticed immediately was, you'll have a minute's silence sometimes at football matches, and you'll hear the odd shout, and it's a bit, but it was impeccably observed, and there was not one. You couldn't, when you say you can't hear a pin drop, you literally couldn't. Followed by the start of the race, but impeccably observed, and I think it was just a reflection of how much respect everybody has in the country for the monarchy and the Queen.
I noticed you called the Great Northern a race then. That sounds like you're taking it a little bit too seriously. Were you?
Yeah. I wasn't thinking about the Queen about 8 or 9, 10 miles in, but I was thinking about collapsing. But there's a lot of events for obvious reasons got cancelled and some went ahead. But I mean that run in particular is all about raising money for charities, and that's what you see on the run, and of course other similar events as well, is people running to raise money for charities, and of course that's what she embodied right over her lifetime. I think
and the family do.
I think if you there was a lot of not confusion in that week, but there was a lot of shall the race continue? We had obviously a couple of Premier League matches being cancelled, because of the obvious reason. But I think it was great that they allowed the Great North Run to continue because of the fact that it was, I think the figures raised £20 million for charity, something like that, across all of the charities. And I think it was obviously fitting that it did continue. But at the start, it couldn't have started. It was a different race because of the fact of what's happened on in the week. But it was impeccably.
And I think, as you say, that event went ahead, others got cancelled. Perhaps that in itself reflects probably how 67 million people in this country feel and around the world. Is everyone's got their own personal view and their own personal recollection and how things might evolve, and that's what we wanted to do on this podcast today. A shorter than usual podcast, but maybe just give you some of our personal reflections and our views, and probably you've had very similar conversations in your families and amongst your friends as well. Just finally then, to sort of finish off, any views on maybe. We've got King Charles III now, and clearly the country, the world will move on as you say, Mark. Any sort of final thoughts on maybe the challenge for him that lies ahead now?
Yeah, I think this for the royal family, Peter. It's the end of the chapter, but it's not the final scene.
Yeah.
But there is a challenge, and a challenge that we hope that every member of the royal family will be able to take on and excel in. And we'll see how that goes in the future. Yeah. It's a much different environment. You was just again before we filmed this, you were talking about the Penn episodes and how that is now visible because the cameras were there. In the past, there'll be private moments that no doubt have either been happy or sad moments or bad-tempered moments that haven't been recorded. And I think there's just in the 70 years of the Queen's reign, things have changed, and everything is more visible and more instant, and I think they need to be very wary of that.
And she stayed. As we said earlier, she stayed with the times, but never, if you like, changed what she stood for or how she went about things. But he was able to stay relevant through changing.
And that's probably the bit that has to stay a degree of constant, even though it is a period of historical change. Some of those values, that ethos, that has to prevail all the way through, and that's probably something that we will hope to see in the coming months.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I thought about really was the unity of the country in the last week. The coming together of everyone, and I think it does bode a lot of good messages for the monarchy moving forward.
Yeah, well, that's a really good note to finish on. So thank you very much, and good to get your personal and professional as well, recollections of Her Majesty the Queen. Thank you very much for watching a different type of podcast this week, and rightly so as well. So, as I said at the start, just wanted to give you some of our own personal views and memories and a bit of our outlook as well. So please feel free to do the same. As I said at the start, we would welcome your comments and your views of Her Majesty the Queen and your own personal reflections as well. Feel free to leave those in the comments box. But for now, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.